Hello and welcome. I'm here again with Richard Schultz. We are going to be talking about the collective shadow. And if you didn't catch our first interview discussion, I'll definitely recommend for you to watch that. And you can watch this, of course, but go back and watch our first session as we talked about what is the shadow. And we went into some really interesting discussion around what is the shadow, how does it affect us, how to work with the shadow, etc. And this one, we're going into the collective shadow and how to understand the collective shadow, how to recognize it, what is it, and how to manage it in the healthiest ways possible. So again, Richard, thank you for being here and joining. And this is going to be a discussion. We're basically going to dive into this topic and also offer guidance and teachings for you watching and listening. This is going to be both on podcast and YouTube for you to manage these energies as we are in some turbulent times energetically. So it's all around how we can understand ourselves and pay attention to the energies, pay attention to the emotions, pay attention to our triggers, for example, how we feel, and how to manage that most importantly. So again, thank you, Richard, for being here.
It's such a pleasure. I had so much fun the last time we played, and when we have our conversations on the side, very much enjoy talking about this favorite subject of yours and mine. And for those viewers that are not viewing but listening, I've got this background that I created for this podcast with this earth in culmination with these shadows kind of jumping up and when we free the shadow. Really, there's when we go into the shadow, there's a levity that happens. We're kind of instead of gravity and pulling us down into suffering, there's a freedom that emerges. So
Mm-hmm.
um, that's why I chose the background is for levity. So let's have some fun.
All right, excellent. Now I look forward to this one. So we're going to go into this topic of collective shadow. And interestingly enough, I just realized that we have a lunar eclipse tomorrow. So we have some pretty crazy energy happening right now. I've done a little bit of content around what we could be experiencing right now. And eclipse season can definitely trigger our shadows and bring up some interesting interesting experiences with other people, within ourselves, emotions, purging, and these aspects are really important, or these timelines are really important, of paying attention to all the different experiences that we have. And eclipse season, lunar eclipse is definitely one of them. We're in Scorpio. So this is where we go into the depths, and we're going to be invited to go deeper into ourselves and pay attention to what we need to face, what we need to release, what we need to honor, what we need to let go of in order to create a new. It's a bit of a death and rebirth, something happening too. So just be aware of that, because that is definitely a theme and I'm feeling it for sure. But we're going into the collective and what the collective means, how to understand it. So let's first talk about what the collective shadow is. What does it mean?
Yeah, another thought came to me as you're speaking, which was interesting, and this the idea of collective and collective energy. We think we think we are separate beings in this body, right? But we are
Mhm.
connected, whether we realize it or not. We're receiving energies from beyond us, from the earth, but certainly from the rest of humanity. So when we're talking about collective, there's these collective energies they're emerging, and and one tip that I've used with clients often is when something happens, when something emerges in you, um, is is a question of, is that yours, or how much
Mm.
of that is yours? Because sometimes for very empathic people, in terms of the collective energy, so there's a collective shadow, and we'll talk about that emerging for the world. There's I'm part of that humanity. So it's going to touch me. If I'm triggered, it's touching me. It may only be a 10%er. It may not be 100% mine to deal with. So what we can sometimes do as empaths, people that are more in touch, is say, how much is it mine? 10%. Oh, let's send the rest back to return to sender, put a stamp on it and send it back. And then the the energy just goes way down. What you have to deal with goes way down to the 10%, and take 100% responsibility for your 10%. You don't have to heal the rest of the world by working with your own stuff. You are influencing the collective anyway.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so dealing with what's yours when these energies emerge.
But
If you're giving it, then part of it's yours, but maybe not all of it. Some people will walk into a room and suddenly they feel really down, and they might just be picking up energy from the collective, and none of it's theirs. They just happen to not have an appropriate energetic boundary for what's happening in the space.
and how do you differentiate? How do you know if it's yours versus collective?
Well, interesting enough, you've just asked that question to someone, and when a number pops into their head, 20%. Oh,
Mm,
20% is mine. We'll send the 80% back
hmm
with love.
hmm hmm
And then the energy just often just changes.
Yeah, interesting. I'll have to practice that. Usually, I actually haven't done that. I haven't. There's
Yeah.
been only one time where I felt really heavy. I just had a flash of like a vision or imagery of the world and like really, really dark struggle. And yeah, I felt heaviness for sure. And I felt it was more of maybe a little bit of a premonition too. I mean, there's obviously a lot of struggle in the world, but I just felt like there's more, there's more coming or something to that nature. I don't know if it was necessarily feeling the collective. It probably was in some sense, but it didn't last too long. But I find that if there are times when I feel uncomfortable and I don't know what it is it mine? Is it the moon? Is it the stars? Is it what's happening here? Is it the collective? I just let it go. I really just sit with it and really just focus on just releasing it, and stepping into more of my own light and um, just being neutral, in that time when it's feeling uncomfortable or just unsettling. You don't know what it is. It kind of feels ick or uncertain. And just find a place of neutrality, just be in that place, let it go and send it back, send it back to sender, with love. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And there could be another question in that, when something comes to us. I'm thinking starting off in this work when you still have not worked with a lot of shadows and done a lot of inner development yet in taking 100% responsibility for what's arising in your world, then sending all that other stuff back and creating boundaries is the first step. But once we start working with self a lot and become more in that sense of wholeness within ourselves, we then may be asked to work with the collective consciousness and the collective shadow. So the next question, how much is this mine, is maybe 20%. Am I to work with the all of it? Yes. Okay. So I have the capacity to work with the collective, maybe, or maybe I can get together with some other people and say, hey, there's a lot of hate rising in the world right now. Are you feeling it? Yeah, I'm feeling it. Why don't we get together and do some work around this, for the collective? So there's this service aspect in shadow work too that healers may get into. But as an individual in the shadow work, taking 100% responsibility for our own creation, our own experience of life is really important. So if I'm feeling triggered, then okay, I'm the one that's feeling triggered here. Taking 100% responsibility for my perception of what that is or isn't, and then doing the inner work.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And we mustn't forget that our energy does affect others too. And we're part of this big interweb of connectedness with all. And the brighter our light can shine, the greater influence we will have. So that's just the way it
Yeah,
works.
yeah. If you do your work, you are working with the collective at the same time, and
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
a little bit different focus.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Let's get talk
let
about this collective shadow, I
yes,
guess. What
what
is
is the
that?
collective shadow? Let's go.
What is it for you? Turn it
For
back to you.
me, it is, yeah, it's when, I mean, we can have on small scales, we can have on global scales. Smaller scales could be Well, when people have their unresolved shadow aspects, and it's the like attracts like, and so people tend to come together in groups and feed into their shadow aspects, gossiping, judgment, anger, hatred, and work together in that. And it's a group of that energy that feeds off of one another unconsciously. And then you have the bigger influenced shadow, which is the, for example, war. And that is, again, a very supported collective shadow to heighten those shadow aspects for negative outcomes. Something else that I wanted to say about that, but it might come to mind a little bit later. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, if we go back to the individual shadow for a moment, very often that arises from a trauma of some kind inside of ourselves as a child. We have an experience or some conditioning that where parts of ourselves are rejected, and that could be parts that we consider bad or parts that we consider light, or our joy, our brilliance, our smartness, whatever. So we have a trauma. In order to survive, we push away that part and then we push it down, suppress it, deny it. Well, families have traumas at a collective level. Peoples have traumas. The indigenous peoples, through colonialism, had all kinds of traumas holding at a collective level within a people or race. And the blacks in United States and the racism, etc. There's creates trauma, and then humanity, all of our experience of humanity, if we look at our ancestors as humanity, all the traumas get collected and we lose our wholeness, our whole sense of we're all having this experience together, and we've lost the deeper sense of care and love in some cases, and we get into wars and things like this. So the it's trauma or shadow is this denial of parts of ourselves and a separation of self. At the collective level, it's also separation of self. And exactly as you said, right now in our world today with social media and this communication, it's funny that people are recognizing and gathering sometimes according to shadow, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes according to against the shadow, but they're arising, and example of denial, and so we're seeing censorship and we're seeing suppression, and we're these terms misinformation and disinformation and malinformation that the governments are talking about, and we see this fake news. What's behind all of that? We can start to shut down and censor people and make laws against misinformation, but what's behind it?
Mm-hmm.
What's underneath of that in the collective shadow? What are we afraid of? What are we separate from? What are the qualities underneath that?
Mm-hmm.
What are your sense? Underneath all of the censorship? What are we afraid of? What's the shadow underneath that? If we look deeper, what's underneath?
Control, fear,
Oh,
but it is unresolved. There was one, I think I did maybe a video on it as well, but when we are operating unconsciously, so when we are not aware of our actions, our shadow, how we project into the world, how we're creating harm onto others, it's a very unconscious act. It's very living unconsciously. And when humans are acting unconsciously, it's very programmable or very manipulative, as it can be easily manipulated or easily influenced and almost justified, having those actions justified in a way, because it's a very unconscious way. So there are many different ways of acting that way, of creating the control, of creating fear. I don't even feel that people in those positions really even know what they're doing. It's just so, I feel. What do you feel about that?
absolutely. It's just shadow behave acts out, and we're unconscious of it, both at the individual level and the collective level. So it's we're doing stuff to push things down. We're working superficially at the symptoms, but we're not aware and we're not conscious of what's really underneath. and therefore we project it in society onto others, very much so. So one of the first steps is to okay, what taking responsibility. I'm those people over there are, but they're racist or whatever. Why am I so triggered by them being racist? What my mind might go round and round and round for days, angry at that person or the government or whoever it may be, and how evil they are. What's within me that is unconscious that makes me so triggered relative to that? Have I taken a have I projected a piece of me because I'm so angry at parts of me that I'm unaware of, that I put it out there so I can see it in the world versus taking responsibility for it within me? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And it's
so
breaking
diving
us.
into what's behind it,
Yeah.
inside. Yeah,
And it's having the strength to break a cycle. It's so
yeah,
easy to retaliate and send hatred back and anger and want to prove. And is it the ego? Is it, like what's in there that's creating that action or that reaction? But it takes such great strength to stand back and let it go, and not feed into it or not react or not develop that hatred or anger towards a certain person if you react or if it's internalized. It takes a lot of discipline. But that's the part of this transition that we go through. It's the more discipline you have and the awareness, the easier it becomes. You don't get as triggered, you don't become as responsive. It'll still come up. I mean, we're human after all, but it does require a lot of awareness and then mindfulness, to really work through it and not again fall into that destructive energy.
yeah, yeah. We Something arises in the world, an experience where we're triggered. The Having the capacity and the practice to and the awareness to pause. Okay, I just got really angry, or I'm feeling frightened right now. And instead of turning that into violence, so we could end abuse of the other person who's doing it to you. Generally, that's not appropriate. It might be in certain circumstances where you have the capacity, you have to protect yourself from physical violence. But in generally, where we pause, take a deep breath, and choose to respond different, or create a space, create an agreement with this person. Something's happening with me. I'm feeling very angry. I need some space. I'll come back with you. So then you go inside, do the work inside, and the shadow work, find out the root of that, heal the root, and then you can come back into that conversation with others, um, in a more balanced way, more neutral way. And maybe it requires an apology. Maybe there's awareness together that you can get. Um, Walking away, forgiving yourself for even thinking that you want to kill yourself or whatever it might be. Because we're all like that. We get
Mhm.
triggered. Wow. There's a the other day, um, we were talking about this just before the podcast around hate. The other day I was working with a client where she was noticing so much anger at abusive people. So the people she abused throughout her life, and she couldn't deal with the anger, and she'd been, on medication and everything else. But we looked underneath. Anger is a natural emotion. So is anxiety. It's telling you something's out of balance inside. So we've gone there before, but this time we found hatred behind. And in her stories, she was talking about, it started to talk about stories about anger at immigrants and things like this that's happening in North America. This is probably collective shadow that was emerging for her, connecting, but she was finding she was noticing hate. When it all came together, there was self-love underneath that she needed to come to, and realizing she the hatred, the abuse that happened in her world had shifted her to become a nice person all the time and just send love to everybody else. But because she wasn't allowed within her psyche to hate. So she pushed the hate down
Right.
and held the hate, which was causing all kinds of physical, emotional issues because the hate was suppressed within her, and the anger on top of that. So her work now is to embrace and bring hatred, acknowledge the hatred so that she's not projecting it into the world. And it was a huge shift for her
Yeah.
when she acknowledged hatred. There is so much hatred in the world, and all we really need is love.
Hmm.
All anybody wants.
Hmm.
But in order to not feel hate, because that we should feel love and loving towards people, some people, in their niceness and their wanting to be kind, they outwardly try as hard as they can to be nice and kind. Inside, they are holding the hatred of the world and it needs to be let out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where imbalances are created. And when we're so imbalanced in a certain way, then something's going to give. Something has to, or something is going to fall apart or come to the surface, or again, in opportune moments, our shadow side is going to show up, or some kind of, or our health is going to take a hit. And I was just thinking how that would be a big breakthrough for someone, because again, when you're working or when you're living life in your based on your programming, unconscious, subconscious programming, you just feel it becomes very natural, acting certain ways and feeling certain ways. We don't even realize it. But then it takes a toll on our health. It takes a toll on friendships and relationships and what we say into the world and how we feel about ourselves in very unconscious ways. So those are big breakthroughs. That's a huge shift. Yeah. So no, that's a wonderful story. Absolutely. But it's a very good example of how the subconscious has such influence on ourselves when we suppress and we don't face. But also too, I mean, this may have happened when she was a child, and how would she know? You know, you just live, you end up living with it. You end up ends up being part of you.
Yeah. So this awareness is the first key. And when we can be with that energy, even hatred, it sounds like crazy to try and be with the feeling of hatred. But if we can be with it, it can transform. So there's a quote, and I can't remember who made the quote. Whatever you cannot be with will never let you be.
Mm.
Right. So if if we cannot be with incompetence, if we cannot be with even something like racism, we cannot be with that energy, it'll never let us be. We'll always have it projected into the world.
Mhm.
It or we will have it hid within us, and which will cause other disruptions in our physical, emotional, mental bodies. So it's about awareness of what is there, and then being with it, being emotionally present with it, and in the bringing it closer, it dissolves. So this consciousness of the collective shadow, the stuff that we've denied and is unconscious collectively, then how do we become aware of some of those things? Because they're actually, the mirror is pointing at us all the time. All we have to do is look in the mirror and see what's there in our collective, and what societies are grasping for now, what they're angry about, or what are some of the patterns in our collective that are happening right now, and then turning that around and taking responsibility, especially if I'm triggered towards that thing, whatever I see out there, and then I can do that work. So I was thinking of an example of right now we're going through this, and the States is doing this too, but gun control as an example in the United States, and this violence, these groups, this hatred of race and everything else. So what's the solution from a non-conscious society? Let's get rid of the guns. Let's have laws.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's going to stop the violence, right? It's not. It's a symptom.
Yeah, that's That's, you can look at health that way, you can look at everything that way, education, you can, every system that we have, there's a mechanism for band-aid fix, or looking at the surface, or hey, look this way instead and find your answer there, rather than it's all here, everything is here, everything. Yeah, so it's, I'm not surprised by that, for sure. It's the people. And even you can look at The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you've read that book by Bessel van der Kolk. I talk about it a lot. It's such an amazing, and he's an incredible person. And there was a study that they implemented in I think it was, could have been Norway. It was more of the Scandinavian countries, around bringing care into homes, disadvantaged homes, like single mothers, for example, or broken homes or something of that nature. And they would bring in extra care to help the mothers and to help the children, and the mothers and the child bond and help them create a relationship. And the crime went down. Everything that stems from abuse and traumas and lack of care, lack of love, had gone down in those countries, and that is, and it has been proven, these studies, and it's incredible. And that is the growing issue, especially in the United States. I mean, Canada here, we're not far behind in many ways as well. But yeah, in the States, it is a serious problem. It's being overlooked. And I feel that it's almost gotten too out of control or out of hand. It's almost this big, like, it's just been in place for so long. It's going to take a huge intervention to really, and maybe it might even require, maybe starting small, bite-sized chunks, do what you can to help society and to give back, and what we can do also, and you listening or watching, what you can do in your own way, and even if it's an energetic way, to help that collective.
Yeah, you mentioned the body and I was reminded of a short conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, and that was the the idea of voice and people not feeling heard and not having a voice
Yeah.
within this environment of misinformation, disinformation, suppression, censorship at the same time is one indicator that there's something happening with a voice. Certain people are not allowed to have voice, and there's a wokeism, etc., shutting people down with the wrong voice. This is shadow, and they're pushing this down. So in Canada, there was also the freedom movement, or the against the vaccination mandates. There was no way that they weren't being listened to. They're suppressed. So
Yeah.
there's a rise up of a lot of people from Canada saying, I have a voice. I want a voice.
Mhm.
I'm going to march on Ottawa. I want you to listen to me. I want to make a statement. And what does the government do is label them as extremists and try and suppress that voice again. I'm not saying you're right or wrong on terms of vaccination or not. There was a cry for voice, which is this a cry, and they also call it the freedom convoy, right? So
Mhm.
there's a cry for more freedom in this environment of tighter controls. We're doubling down on control, prevent violence, etc. And at the same time, people are feeling less free. Some people want it because within those control, they think they're more safe, but they're not free. It's a suppression. When we suppress the shadow, it will arise and it will explode at some point. It's dangerous in the shadows. And around voice, around North America, certainly maybe around the world, there is a thyroid epidemic.
Mm.
Thyroid symptoms, like undiagnosed,
Mhm.
with all kinds of energy issues, etc. Where does the thyroid sit? Right on the voice.
Yeah.
So bringing voice to the shadow is also important. Bringing it into the open, being aware of the shadow that we suppress, that wants a voice, wants to come out in the open, and hand us as a society a gift. And as you said, lend us true love and true care. and other qualities inside the shadows that we've pushed away. Inside hatred is perhaps love, is transforming that into love of all, no matter what they do.
Yeah. The majority of people I've worked with have, and myself included, it's constant in my throat, have had problems with their throat, and confidence speaking up. Not so much speaking up in protest, but sharing their wisdom, sharing their knowledge, sharing their information, feeling comfortable. They're not going to get attacked or shamed or judged or censored. And that goes back hundreds of years. I mean, we've been living in this for a long time. It comes in ancestral, past life, this life, we have to find our way through this trauma that we've had for who knows how long, really. But this is something that I feel, especially in this timeline, what we're starting to come into, it's, even though there's still suppression and there's censorship, there still is a surge of people who want to be heard, and it's growing more and more, and that is something beautiful. And it may happen in the voice coming up, it might have negative consequences, might not, but it's something that is, it's like, it's coming up to be heard. And there's still a lot of people who can't speak, and don't feel comfortable speaking. There's a huge demographic. And then I'll just go out on a limb and say that a lot of those people who won't speak up or show themselves will target others, maybe online. They'll be behind a fake avatar, sending hatred out just to be heard and just to get their shadow onto someone else, or get their word out there in not so great ways. It's interesting.
Yeah. So you can react in different ways to the same shadow of not being heard. You
Yeah.
can not being heard, you can suppress it, not feel comfortable using your voice, so not able to get out there from that shadow. Or not being heard can turn into, I'm going to make you hear me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or
And
hate, just this
over, or
anger to.
hate,
Mm-hmm.
or speaking too much, taking
Mm-hmm.
over the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because you think there's still an issue with voice there. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get people to hear you because you're right and they're wrong, etc. So it's all there's thyroid, there's voice connected with all of these things. So that, and what you said, um, you know, this is a time when there's so many shadows emerging. The beauty of social media and this global communication is right now we can start to see the shadow emerging everywhere as people congregate and emphasize the shadow. It's in our face.
Mm-hmm.
Before, we couldn't see it. It was more subtle. Right now, it's consciousness is saying, hey, deal
Yeah.
with me or it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
We have to learn as a society is, okay, so how are we going to deal with that shadow? How am I going to deal with that shadow in me? That's the first, or really the first step is become aware of the shadow, and then, okay, take responsibility. Is this within me? What are the wounds within me that cause the separation of self, bringing that back? And then start, how do we work also in communities to bring this awareness and sit and listen and give people voice and heal this as a collective also? How do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I'll share a quick story of my own that I shared with you before this before this call for everyone as well, and how I had to work through it myself. Where I posted a very, very short, probably 15-second video on YouTube the other day, and basic information. It was something pertaining to the law of attraction, just being in a higher frequency. And I have never experienced so much hate with any of my content pieces before. And like I said, it was 15 seconds. It was a quick message meant for anyone who needs to hear it at this time. But for some reason, it just, and maybe it, I've been on YouTube now for 2.5 years. I have two channels. I have never experienced anything like that before. And I don't know if it's just, one of those things that slipped out slipped out of the bubble of the law of attraction viewers and just went into some other realm or wherever, or if it's just like you said, like it's just there's this surgence of just something's coming to the surface, like it just is this very intense energy. And anyway, there were a few comments on it that really triggered me. Some made me angry. Some made me actually quite sad that it was hard for me to actually open my phone or open my the app to the YouTube channel to read the comments or find updates, because there was always something coming in. It was like constant yesterday. And so it made me actually, at first I was angry, and then I got very sad with it. So it was interesting. It was more on self-reflection, and unconsciously, I have a very strong anger trigger. So I had to be very aware of that. And then there are some people who, no matter how kind you respond, they won't have it. You know, they won't listen to it. They won't have it. It's basically an end conversation, and there's no interaction. And some people you don't want to even bother interacting with, or investing your energy into a situation where you know it's not going to go anywhere. So you have to be discerning with these things. But there are some that are open to conversation, but they'll want their way to be heard, and that's the way, right? And so you can feel their energy where they're coming from. So I did engage with a couple of people, and it was very headstrong energy that I was dealing with. So it made me actually also go into a place of tempering it, you know, trying to temper it, and at least resolving it in a way of it's based on my frequency. You know, we can change our energy entering a situation that's confrontational. I've used this analogy a few times of, I don't know if I did it in our last call or not, but you know, the wounded dog, the stray dog that's fleas, and it has missing fur and teeth, and just like broken, bent over ear, huddling in a corner, barely alive, and biting at people who try to touch it. And then it gets rescued, and it comes into an environment of love and care and nurturing. And then you see the after story of the dog all of a sudden being this, you know, beautiful dog that's brand new personality, just like that. Dogs. It's amazing how dogs can just get over it. But for some reason, humans are a little bit more complicated. It takes a long time for us to get over things. We have a lot more going on in here, but it's a similar story. I mean, if you give someone love in a situation that is confrontational, I mean, use your judgment on it, use your discernment always. Some of it doesn't even require your time. But if it's worth it, and if you feel that there's an opportunity there to work with the situation, it's going to require you to really self-reflect and come into it in the right way, so that you're not triggered, and you're not coming from hatred. And Richard, before also you mentioned that when we face our hatred and when we face our negative energies, that's when we get to resolve them. They do dissolve. And it's not like we have to deal with this for the rest of our lives. The point of this work is so that we can come to a better place. We can arrive to a better place, and we can hold the space for others, and we can deal with difficult situations with ease, and we can heal ourselves and our body. That's the whole point of this work, right? So I feel that even for myself, that probably I feel like I've done a lot of this work to help me. Before, I couldn't talk in front of people. I could never do this. There was no way. I was petrified. When I worked in the corporate culture, I would be trembling in groups of people. I couldn't say anything. I would lose my mind, stutter, I would be a mess. And I feel that it's taken a lot of determination and a lot of focus, because I want to talk. I want to help. I want to do more with myself. I don't want to limit myself anymore. But again, we all have different journeys, and sometimes we have to come to that place where we want better, or we want to not be suppressed and not have ourselves feel limited, because it's such a restricting energy to be in. And speaking from the other side, this is way better. Still working on it. It's not 100%, but I feel that especially doing what I'm doing with content and these types of environments, the shadow work is essential so that I can keep doing what I want to do and not hover in a corner and cry all day, which I wanted to do. No, to rise above it and to keep going, you know.
Yeah. And you portrayed just there in the story the gift of the shadow. So
Mhm.
from where you were is this timidness, this fear, etc. Inside of that is your voice, is in your purpose of the world. So so sitting in that place of being shy, feeling restricted, I don't like this. I want to feel heard. I want to be able to get my voice out there. So so the impulse comes and a projection into your future of what you want to become. And it came from not feeling comfortable where you were. So the shadow parts don't feel comfortable. So what's rising in the world right now in the collective is showing us, saying, hey, we can be better than this, or has that opportunity. There's
Mhm.
always an opportunity. Who do we want to become as a human collective? Do we want to come and start destroying our planet and throwing garbage all over the place? Who do we want to be? Let's clean it up. Let's clean up. Do we want this violence? Are we going to, or do we want the addictions and the drug addictions? Is this the kind of society we want, where we take certain people and push them off into, say, prisons or whatever? Who do we want to become? And how do we work at a deeper level with all these things? So inside the shadow, inside everything that's arising, which looks terrifying, absolutely terrifying where we're going, but it's also having the collective, hopefully, saying, what's the opportunity? Who do we really want to be? If we go into this and understand and look at the corruption that's happening in our political leadership and the corruption itself, the racism that's happening, and the and the judgment that goes around us, the authoritarianism that seems to be emerging and our reaction to that. If we deal with it the superficial level, like taking away guns or suppressing people, we're still in the shadow.
Yeah.
We're still in the shadow. But there's an impulse. We want more. So wokeism and everything else is an indicator that we want more. We're just uh, coming from shadow. We're not coming from a loving place yet. Do-gooders can do a lot of harm if they're coming from the trauma and coming from the shadow.
Mhm.
So how do we change that, and what, or even what's arising? What's arising, is for the audience here that's listening to this. What's arising for you? What can't you stand in the world? What do you hate out there? And does it trigger you? I hate unfairness. Really triggers me. Oh, so there's something inside that really gets your anger up. Then okay, how do I? It's subtle. What's underneath that? You're talking about the the experience of social media. Anger popping up. Anger is a beautiful energy. If you can't use anger, you can't be at one with anger, then what's underneath the anger? Sometimes, and anger is really good for boundaries. Sometimes anger arises because you have not actually set the appropriate boundary for yourself, energetically or physically. Um, and so it's a learning around boundaries and that discernment, that decision. Do I jump into this conversation, or can I put a boundary there too and say, hey, it's not for me to resolve all the hatred out of the world. I can't change their mind. There's a lot of people in their head. They're not gonna. Yeah, I was in a meeting the other day, and we got into this defensiveness, this conversation in this community, but we'd already formed this community. And so we said, okay, stop. We are a community. We don't have to process this from two sides. We can process this together. Let's speak into the center of the circle versus at each other. And let's drop to it, take a pause and drop to our heart. And the whole energy of the group changed.
Mhm.
And we actually got into how much we cared for each other. And all these expressions of that were starting into a defensiveness and offensiveness was was really about because we cared about each other. Underneath was caring, and people wanted their hear their have their voice heard. Pausing, dropping to the heart versus here, trying to figure it out, changed everything, and we got to a very different place.
Beautiful. That's the way. The pause. The uncomfortable pause. I need to get back at that now. Hit the send button. Yeah, that's my impulsiveness. Yeah, the pause is really important. Pause, reflect. Yeah, and again, excellent takeaway for viewers, listeners. Check in. Where is the hatred residing? Where are your triggers residing? What is it teaching you? How can you pause? How can you self-reflect, bring more of the awareness into your emotions and reactions and go deeper with it, and that's where you find your answers, the why. Go deep into that why question. There's a really interesting, when I was working back in my marketing days, there was an interesting process that a lot of the engineers would use, and it's the why test. So you go 7 layers down into the why. So you find your top problem, you're probably more superficial, or your action, what you're conscious of, and go into why. Why am I feeling that way? Well, why am I feeling that way? Or why is this? And go into those whys. Always just go dive as far deep down as you can, and try to just observe what's the ego. Because the ego will really want to prove and want to be right. But when you get into your heart, that's where the truth lies, and it will give you the truth. The ego likes to hold on. That's been I've had a very strong aspect of that I've had to let go of. Almost there.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're so much in touch with my body and feelings in the body, but the body that's holding these energies doesn't lie either.
Mm-hmm.
There's a truth there, but you have to spend some time with it. So if you've got if anger is arising and maybe it's in the belly, if that's where it mostly is localized, or if it's up around here, whatever, just be present with that and ask that part. What is that about? What's underneath that? What's that? And something very often will arise. You're looking for a word or a phrase of what's behind that. So I've got anger here. What's behind it? And then searching, is that it? When you land and then going again, is this it? Is this it? No, not quite. Is this it? And there will be words that arise. And when you land on whatever it is, tears or something comes forth, you feel it, and it just goes whoosh, and it's here, and then that's it. That's the handle. You can grab onto it now with a handle. It gives you a handle when you find the right energy behind it, and it's very specific for the person. So when I was talking about the client the other day, it was we were playing with the anger and we were playing with our body, and we anger, and then underneath that a few words, and then suddenly hatred arose. He started to own her own hatred, and everything started to change, and the body shifted, and the sensation in the body disappeared. Body says, "Thank you, you got me."
Yeah. The body says, thank you for letting it go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've been holding on to this for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can just, the body is, everything is connected. Our beliefs, our emotions, our actions, our body, it's all connected. And our body takes the hit for a lot of this stuff, unconsciously. Yeah. So tuning in is also equally important there. Yeah. All right.
Lots covered here. Did we talk about the collective shadow? I guess we did.
We did. We did.
Lots
We
of other
could.
stuff too.
It's all good. It's all connected. It's all part of the
Yeah,
collective.
it is. It's all
It
part of
is.
it. The individual work we do is connected to the collective. The collective is influencing us. Um, just sitting in awareness. How am I being disturbed? What's upsetting me? Every upset is set up.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity. Every upset is a setup for some opportunity, some gifting. Ah, there's something happening here. I've been set up, or I'm upset. What is this setting me up for? What is consciousness asking me to be aware of and do some work with? Is it hatred? Is it my stupidity? Is it my anger? Is it my anxiety? What's behind those things? What's underneath? Is it I hate dishonesty? What is it behind it? And it's a beautiful what arises when we do that work. Is there's the shadow is free, the gifting comes out. You learn to that your purpose is to use your voice rather than what's suppressed or whatever it may be. It gives you meaning and love and life and aliveness.
And also never forget that what is triggering that emotion is not where the answer lies. So the initial spark that fuels the anger or the frustration is not where the answer lies. It's not that person. It's not our politicians. It's not, it has nothing to do with that. That gives you the clue as to what's happening in here, but you need to go deeper to understand what it is and not look at the outside world as the problem.
Well said. Because that's the superficial look at it. It's the clue. It's the indicator. It's like your light on your car, indicator light on your engine of your car. There's the
Mhm.
light there. Well, couple things you can do. You can see if it's telling you something that's wrong, that's out of balance with the engine, or you can unplug the indicator light, and and that's what we're doing typically in society. We're getting rid of the light, the indicator light. We're rather than seeing if there's something behind it. And
Mhm.
often we need help to find out what's behind it because we're so unconscious and it's been something we've been pushing away and the ego does not want to see it. There are parts of our reality we cannot face that. Sometimes we need some help in like you. I'm not a mechanic. If my engine light comes on in my car, I'm going to go to the mechanic to help me figure out what the issue is, the diagnostic. And when we get to well, if the carburetor has this issue or whatever, then it can be put back into balance.
Perfect. Yeah. And if you don't go and get your car checked, your engine's going to fall out. It's that simple. It's that simple. That is how it works. All right. Well, thank you so much, Richard. This was a lovely discussion. I love talking about this. I can talk about it all day. But we'll end it here. And again, I'll leave Richard's contact information if you want to get in touch with him. Of course, if you want to get in touch with myself, you know where to find me. But Richard, as always, it's a pleasure. I love these conversations, and we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much. I also have a lot of fun. We'll do it again.